what I find in my work is a lot of times when we hear disability, we tend to just think of someone with a physical disability, and we tend to go to certain abilities that people have or don't have. And the truth is that disability is not a monolith, and it looks very different. And so this is actually a picture of me and some of my good friends on a Zoom call 3 or 4 years ago. The reason I have this up here is because so I have a physical disability. It also could be called developmental in the sense that I obtained it. I had my brain injury when I was developing as a child and a teenager. But what's interesting about this picture is, so if you were to meet me in person, I walk with a very visible limp. I have very limited use of my left arm and hand. And that is something that's apparent, right, when you meet me in person. But it's not something apparent over a Zoom camera. And that was one of the big ahas I had during the pandemic. Is a lot of the clients I was working with and that just met for the first time over Zoom didn't understand the perspective I was coming from because the disability was not apparent to them over Zoom. So I share all that, to kind of give us an idea of how diverse disability is, and people's experiences are very different. So today we're going to talk about my experience and the intersection with mental health, but that's not everyone's experience who has a disability. And so it's really important here that we understand disability is so diverse. And the most important takeaway, if there's one today, is don't make assumptions and ask people about their preferences and their own style and their own needs. Again, just some sort of context here to keep everyone on the same page. A disability might be a chronic illness. It could be an anxiety condition. It could be someone who is neurodiverse and their brain type is different. It could be somebody who has a physical difference. It also could be some people have short-term disabilities. Some have lifelong disabilities like I've had since I was 8. Disability changes, right? Like some days, certain people may need to use a mobility device like a wheelchair, and other days they might not. So again, just giving you some examples here of sort of the spectrum of the disabled experience. And then on top of that, I think it's really important to remember that disability intersects all other forms of diversity. Every race, religion, age, ethnicity, gender, orientation, socioeconomic status. And then when we think about mental health specifically, as we get into some statistics, one of the things I want to ground us in is that adults with disabilities, and this is according to the CDC in the United States, adults with disabilities report 5 times the mental distress of those without. And then this is a little bit of a, perhaps a triggering statistic. So if you want to mute or turn off the audio for a second, that's totally acceptable. But people with disabilities do have a higher risk of suicide than those without, according to research out of the UK and the University of Florida. And again, I think it's worth highlighting that, there's a lot of intersections here, right? And so again, we don't make assumptions. We want to provide support for everyone. And then just really quick, some stats on employment, because next month is National Disability Employment Awareness Month in the States. Some quick stats, and then we'll get to the conversation. So the CDC reports that 1 in 4 U.S. adults have a disability. And I think what's interesting that you'll see here is there are a lot of reporting gaps, as I'm sure some of us are well aware, right? Because there's a stigma to reporting your disability in the workforce. And so we see things like BCG found that 3 to 7% of the workforce tend to report that they have a disability, whereas again, we see 1/4 of the world's population has a disability. Another factor here is that 19% of persons with a disability are employed, compared to 63% of those without. So again, a lot of factors here, but just wanted to ground us in that before we moved forward.